Over the course of the last year, in order to fight inflation, the Federal Reserve has undergone the most aggressive series of interest rate hikes and quantitative tightening in its history. And while many worry that this is going to cause unspeakable harm to the economy, the Federal Reserve has been justifying these rate hikes by pointing to the strong jobs market.
Very strong labor market.
The very strong labor market.
The employment rate is still one of the lowest we've had in history.
That would point to the labor market.
Given how strong the job market was.
The labor market is now extremely strong.
Resilient, strong labor market.
We have a strong labor market.
But as you're going to see in the data today, the jobs market is nowhere near as strong as they're telling us. This is part 3 of my interview series with the Happy Hawaiian, which I am referring to as garbage in, garbage out. That's a phrase borrowed from computer science, where the output of a calculation is only as good as the data points you feed into it. And right now, the Fed is making monetary policy decisions based on flawed economic data. In part 1, we talked about how the rent inflation was being manipulated. In part 2, we talked about how the dumping of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was affecting energy inflation numbers. And today we are talking about the jobs market. And without any further ado, here is the Happy Hawaiian. The reason why the Fed is doing all these rate hikes and the reason why they're trying to fight inflation, or that they think it's okay to continue fighting inflation, is because they're telling us how strong the jobs market is and the labor market. And they keep going back and they're saying, look, there's still tightness in the labor market. Unemployment is still low. The economy is still creating jobs. So it's okay to continue tightening, even though a lot of people are saying you've already over-tightened. And one of the reasons why they think it's okay to continue tightening is because of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, their monthly jobs numbers. And just released on December 13th, is a little over a week ago, this came out. This was put out by the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. This is early benchmark revisions of state payroll employment. And, well, this was a massive story, and it got virtually zero attention in the mainstream financial press. To my knowledge, CNBC has not at all covered this. I don't even think Bloomberg has covered this. Zero Hedge is the only media outlet. I'll use that term loosely. Zero Hedge, I think they probably don't want to be called a media outlet, but they're the only ones who covered this. Early benchmarks for all 50 states in the District of Columbia. And what they're saying here is basically, well, I'm just going to read you through this. Estimates by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia indicate that the employment changes from March through June of 2022, second quarter data, were significantly different in 33 states in the District of Columbia compared with current state estimates. I'm skipping down. They say in aggregate, 10,500 new jobs were added during the period, rather than the 1.121 million jobs estimated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics jobs numbers. So, slight rounding error here. We thought it was 1,121,500 jobs, but it was actually only 10,500 jobs were created. Whoops.
Yeah. And people would think of a country of 330 million people that maybe this is a rounding error, but it is very much not. And other people might see a million people and never think it's a rounding error, people with more empathy than maybe the Fed. But the workforce is only about 160 million people in the US. So only about half the people are in the workforce. And so if you add or subtract 1.1 million jobs, instead of our unemployment rate being 3.7 right now, we'd already be at 4.3 or 4.4%. So that is a huge difference in that if you look historically, every time we have crossed above 4.5% unemployment, that is when the Fed has stopped hiking. So if we go below 4.5% for a while and then cross back above it, that's when the Fed typically stops hiking. And right now they're talking every month or every 6 weeks when they have a meeting. The labor market is strong, we can continue hiking. But in reality, which I think this is probably obvious to anyone on the ground, getting paid a wage that is declining versus inflation, labor market strength is not what they say it is. And the economy is not nearly as strong as Powell claims. And they're almost to the point where they would typically stop rate hikes on the unemployment rate. So inflation is still at 7 by their measure. And real unemployment is probably up at 4.3 or 4.4. And the thing is, I do think, unlike the inflation numbers, the jobs numbers will eventually reflect these differences. So they do annual revisions, and I think at some point we're going to see this flow through, and people will be shocked that all of a sudden unemployment is shooting up when the job market seems so strong for so long, when really it was just weaker that entire time.
I've heard somebody say February was when that annual revision is due, and that's when there's going to be a shock to the system when it comes to the job numbers and the
There
unemployment.
should be, government bureaucrats might say, "Oh, well, we know there's a difference. Let's smooth it out over a couple months and let it flow through." Hopefully they stay consistent and it just pops higher, and we see, oh my gosh, we were looking at a mirage this whole time of a strong labor market. But I think there's plenty of other signs you can look at to see that, the job market was weaker than claimed. I already mentioned one, that if you have a strong labor market and labor is in shortage, true shortage, we kept hearing about the labor shortage, then wages would be increasing faster than inflation. And that has not been happening for 2 years now. And if you think about all of the components in inflation, if there's a shortage of oil, maybe over the last year, gasoline has gone up 50% in price, while the overall inflation is up 7%. And it's because something else, there's not a shortage and it's only up 1%, or maybe even down. There's a couple things that are down even. So the things that are in shortage increase faster than that overall mean rate of inflation. And we haven't seen that for 2 years for labor. So why isn't the price of labor increasing faster than the average inflation rate if there's such a shortage of it? I don't know why people haven't been asking that question, while, Powell and other people keep talking about the labor shortage, but it seems like a pretty obvious one to ask
So
to
the
me.
simple answer is the labor market is not as tight as they're telling us. Is that what
Right.
you're saying?
There's a wage shortage, not a labor shortage. And if there was a true labor shortage, you would see wages increasing at or above that rate of inflation. What you really have is people not in the labor market, which is for a variety of reasons. But if wages increase at a rate faster than inflation, I would guess that more people would come off the sidelines to take those jobs. But businesses are not desperate enough. There's not truly a shortage to the extent that they have to raise wages faster than the prices of the goods that they're selling. That's fundamentally what's going on. The prices of the goods that labor is involved in producing are increasing faster than the price of that labor. So there's almost an arbitrage there. Why wouldn't companies hire more people if the prices of the goods are increasing faster than the prices of the labor? The labor is getting cheaper on a relative basis. So I just have a very different view than most of the mainstream economists on the labor market. And I think it's been obvious for a long time, and they're all going to act shocked in a few months. And I don't know if that's fake surprise or genuine, but
I'm working on my surprised face. We'll see.
Right.
I'm shocked when they announce these revisions. Now, you had something pretty interesting you put out just today, and I saw this, like 30 seconds before we started this interview, I saw this tweet came out. I've never heard this before, but this is a really good thought that you put out here. You said St. Louis Fed research shows that the openings data no longer correlates to the unemployment rate as it once did. Openings are inflated due to remote job postings show up in multiple cities. Further, real wage growth being negative points to a weaker job market. So because of remote work, I could post the same job in Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles, right? So that will show up as 3 job openings, even though it's really just 3 postings for the same job. Am I interpreting this correctly?
yeah. So this actually came out, I believe, back in June, maybe July. I'm trying to remember. And I've posted it many times in response to, I posted it, I think I tweeted it out myself, but I also posted it in response to several people over the last few months talking about how there's such a shortage of people looking for jobs compared to the amount of jobs available, or job openings. And this is one of the main talking points that Powell uses as well in his speeches, that there's still more job openings than people looking for work. There's a shortage of labor. But what we actually have, and as the St. Louis Fed research shows, is that there is a fundamental shift in how we should interpret this job openings data since the pandemic and since work from home started. So as they go in and survey all these separate cities of what is the labor market like in each city, they're looking at the number of job openings. But what we have is companies posting the same job in 10 different cities, or tagged with 10 different cities, because it's a remote job. So one person could fill that job and 10 postings come down all of a sudden. So this chart shows that historically, as the vacancy rate goes up, so the number of job openings goes up, the unemployment rate goes down, which makes sense because if people were looking for work and all of a sudden there's a lot of open jobs, those things will get matched up and the unemployment rate will come down. And that was true before the pandemic, and it's still true now. The difference is it takes a lot more openings now to get the same movement downward in the unemployment rate, because those openings are not truly reflective of the number of openings that actually exist. There's an inflation in the number of job openings posted compared to the actual number of openings that exist. So this is another talking point that Powell has been harping on all year that is also not exactly true in terms of there being a severe labor shortage and the labor market being strong. He's looking at data that has fundamentally shifted in how we should interpret it.
So looking at this data right now, looking at the red dots here, the post-pandemic recession, we've had this massive step change up, assuming due to remote work. So we've had somewhere between 11 and 10 million job openings in the United States for really all of this year. And I can just tell by the gap between these two groupings here that number could be overstated by as much as, what, a third? So really this 11, 10 million job openings is really something more like 6 to 8 million job openings?
Yeah, absolutely. So you might as well just lop off 40% of the job openings on any given date that we see going forward. And so the 1.5 jobs for every unemployed person is more like 1 job for every unemployed person, which is, again, we have a low unemployment rate because there's a lot of openings. And why are companies posting a lot of openings? It's because labor is on sale. The price of labor is going down relative to the prices of the goods and services that labor is producing. So companies are able to raise prices still at a faster rate than it costs them to hire people in terms of wages. So it's not a head scratcher for me why we have a low unemployment rate. It's because labor is on sale effectively, and it's been increasingly on sale. But at the same time, the labor market is just not nearly as strong as the Fed has been saying all year, as they've been hiking.
And that would also explain the inexplicably low labor force participation rate. People are not coming back to the workforce because it's not worth their time to do it.
It's not, yeah. They'd rather, in 2021, very much so, there was some gap in terms of people saying, why would I go work when I can, for a low wage, when I can collect an equal or better wage with that expanded unemployment? But that's been gone for a while. And you still haven't seen people come back. And people they'd rather live a more minimalist lifestyle than sacrifice their time and energy to go work for increasingly a worse deal in terms of work X hours, I can buy Y more things. You work the same number of hours, you can buy fewer things. And that's not really reflective of a true shortage, as I've said a few times now. If there was truly a shortage of labor, then companies would be offering wages that allow people to buy, that increase their purchasing power relative to the goods and services that labor is producing.
All right, so let's let's look at this whole thing in aggregate then. These three topics we've talked about. We've talked about how the rent numbers are skewed in the inflation numbers, that the inflation rose significantly in the rents in 2021, and now they've actually started to come down. But because of this lag, because of this growing error in the CPI rents, now we've got the inflation data is not giving us a real world picture of what the rent situation is like on the ground. We've got the energy situation, which energy was one of the biggest inputs to inflation in 2022 because of the situation in Eastern Europe. But the dumping of the SPR, even though we might be measuring the energy prices accurately, the entire energy market has been skewed by the dumping of the SPR. And then on the labor side, we've got this massive error that the Philly Fed has just come out and talked about with the BLS data. And then we've got the fact that the remote work postings are artificially skewing the demand for labor, and that the labor market is not really anywhere near as tight as we're being told. So these three things in aggregate, we've got major errors in three of the biggest data points that the Federal Reserve is looking at to determine monetary policy: the rent, the energy, inflation stories, and then the result that the monetary tightening is having on the labor market. So again, I say garbage in, garbage out. These three huge data points, jobs, energy, and rent, are all being massively skewed in their measurements, and the government is making these decisions based on flawed data. If not, they're just outright flying blind. Am I missing anything here? Am I oversimplifying or exaggerating here? What?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly. The unemployment rate is artificially low. The inflation rate is directionally wrong in that it should be decreasing faster, but it should have peaked at a much higher rate. So I think you're totally right. I mean, the data that they're relying on to set monetary policy is incredibly flawed, or they know the reality and they're just being deceitful for a variety of reasons. I go back and forth on the Fed of, are they BSing us or are they stupid? What's going on here? I feel like it switches back and forth. But right now we could at least give them some benefit of the doubt. And with your mantra of garbage in, garbage out, the reason we're getting garbage out is because the data going into their decisions is also garbage.
And if you had to say net effect, what is this going to look like 6 months to a year from now? What do you see happening because of this?
Yeah, if they just corrected that 1 million jobs, 1.1 million jobs, that gets us to 4.3, 4.4 unemployment rate. And the trend is higher. So we could be to 4.5 in the first half of next year if they just correct for the data error. And we continue trending as we have on the labor market, which is typically when the Fed gets inside their little huddle and says, hey, this unemployment rate is not trending as we like, and they stop hiking. Conveniently, I think that already times out with their timeline of stopping hikes, maybe after February or the next meeting. So maybe they're aware of this and they know the unemployment rate's going to spike, and that's why they've been signaling that. And they're going to stop hiking as well. And they say they're going to hold it flat for a long time. Maybe that's true, but if the unemployment rate keeps going up, then I think the market, which is pricing in 50 basis points of hikes by the end of the year, is probably smelling the BS in the data and anticipating the shocked face that Powell is going to come out with when he cuts late next year.
I wouldn't bank on that shocked face from Powell. Never play poker with that man. He has got it.
He has an amazing. I've said that too. He has a fantastic poker face.
Yeah. Even though those gargantuan bushy eyebrows of his, they never move. I mean, just facial tics alone should have that thing bouncing up and down. They never move. He's stone cold. He's perfect for the job.
Absolutely.
All right, Happy. One more thing I got to ask you about, and this one I'm going to blindside you with. A couple of months ago, we got together on Wall Street Silver's channel. We were talking about silver prices, and Jim Lewis asked us, how low is silver going to go? And I remember I gave Jim a heart attack because I told him $11 or $12. And then you came in and you said it was something like, correct me if I'm wrong, 17 to 1750 was the low you were calling based on your smoke indicator.
Yep.
Well, it looks like you were right. So my hat tip to you, sir, because we got pretty close to your low and then we bounced hard. Now we're sitting around $24 on silver.
Right.
Have we seen the lows?
I think so. But I've also said that before. When I say, have we seen the lows? I think it is going higher. My smoke indicator that I referenced before, it's a constantly changing price floor, essentially, where if silver absolutely dumps, if no one wants it, if there's no monetary premium priced in at all, that's what I view the price floor being. And that's what I quoted in that Wall Street Silver interview that I guess people could go look up if they want to. Or maybe we'll put a timestamp.
I'll put a link down in the description below with the timestamp.
Okay, yeah. And that has actually gone a bit lower since. It's down to the floor is closer to just under 17 now. But so if we had a depression type of event March 2020, I could see it dipping even below 17 if that happened. I think the trend is going the other way because the market is smelling this pivot, and I think the pivot helps commodities tremendously. So I think the low is in. Obviously I'm quite long commodities overall, including silver. So I'm on the long side. I think it's going higher. It needs to go a decent bit higher before I'm probably going the other way. But yeah, I think the low is in, and I think smoke has been reliable so far in terms of determining a great time to buy. And it's still a great time to buy. It's just not as good as it was.
All right. Well, folks, remember that is the Happy Hawaiian on Twitter. I will put a link down in the description below, both to that description or to that video that we did on Wall Street Silver, and I'll put a link to his Twitter following. I highly recommend you follow him on Twitter. Again, he was on my channel bucket list, one of 5 that I said, these are the names that I want to have on my channel. His work is solid. He does fantastic chart work. And you're one of the OGs, if you will, of the silver squeeze movement.
Right.
You were there in the early days. You did a lot of really solid DD early on. And it's just been a real pleasure to follow your work ever since. And thank you very much for coming on the channel, for sharing your time with us. Anything you want to add before we call it a day?
Just likewise, I appreciate the stuff you do. I love your name, Nobody Special. I would have taken that name had I known it at the time. I signed up with my name as a totally random Reddit person who then blew up on Wall Street Bets. So wasn't planning with any kind of intentionality on the Happy Hawaiian. I'm not Hawaiian. I've said it many times. I'm not Hawaiian. I just love the alliteration, and had visited Hawaii a few times, and didn't ever expect to be a more broadly known person. I was just an anon poster on Wall Street Bets that occasionally put a good DD out there and blew up. So if you're actually Hawaiian, I don't want to offend anybody. Occasionally I get someone on Twitter being, he's not a real Hawaiian. I'm like,
you're guilty. The cardinal sin of cultural appropriation.
Exactly. Yep. I was so ignorant of this to the point where, if you're from California, you're known as like a Californian, right? Or Texas, you're a Texan. I assume the same for Hawaii. I was like, it'd be sweet to live in Hawaii. I'd love to be a Hawaiian. I'd be a happy Hawaiian, right? Love that alliteration. In Hawaii, it's not like that because Hawaiian is also, of course, the name of the Hawaiian natives. So instead of being a Native American like you are on the mainland, Hawaiian is the name for the natives. And the people who have lived there are Hawaiian residents. So they flip the who gets the extra word. So it's extra offensive because it's like I'm claiming I'm a native Hawaiian, I guess, by just saying
not
Hawaiian.
Even with the residential disclaimer
exactly
attached.
Wow. And I'm not even a resident either. I just visit, which I say in my Twitter bio too. So if you want to cut off this entire explanation of me rambling about that's fine. But if you want to include it too, that's perfect.
You know what? If it's going to ruffle woke feathers, we're going to put it in there. We have something similar from where I'm from New Jersey. We don't complicate it though. If you're from New Jersey, you're just an asshole. So
Yeah, exactly. I wish it was that simple for me. But maybe someday if I ever get doxxed, I'll change my name or something. But
all right, Happy. Well, I appreciate very much your time. Thank you for sharing your charts and your TA with us. Absolute solid stuff. Again, check out his Twitter feed. I'm going to put a link in the description down below. And until next time, live small and dream big.